The knock came at 9:47 p.m. Solomon Adebayo heard it from the kitchen, where he had just poured himself 2 fingers of aged scotch and was standing by the counter, loosening his tie after what had been, by any reasonable measure, the worst board meeting of his quarter. $43 million in projected losses. 3 executives threatening to resign. His CFO crying, actually crying, in the bathroom afterward. And now this. A knock. At this hour. He set the glass down. Renee was already in bed. She had kissed him on the cheek at 8:30, told him not to stay up worrying, and disappeared upstairs with her book and her chamomile tea and the quiet grace she had always carried. Solomon envied that about her. The ability to set things down. He had never quite learned it. He walked to the front door, checked the security monitor mounted to the wall beside it, a small screen showing a grainy, greenish image of his front porch, and went completely still. A girl. Small. Maybe 11 or 12. Dark-skinned, wearing a thin hoodie that was clearly not enough for a night that had dropped to 51 degrees. She was holding something against her chest. A bundle. It took Solomon a moment to register what the bundle was, and when he did, his stomach dropped. A baby. She was holding a baby. He opened the door. The cold air came in first, sharp and immediate, and then the full picture of her hit him. She was exhausted in the way that children should never be exhausted. Not sleepy, but worn, ground down, like she had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and had simply gotten used to the weight. Her eyes were cautious but direct. She wasn't crying. That somehow made it worse. "I'm sorry to bother you, sir," she said. Her voice was steadier than it had any right to be. "I'm not trying to cause any trouble. I'm only asking for a glass of milk. Just one glass. For my brother." Solomon stared at her. "How old is he?" he asked, because it was the first thing that came out of his mouth. 8 months, she said. "His name is Tobias. He's been crying for a while, and I don't have anything to give him." The baby stirred against her chest at the sound of his name, made a small, weak sound that wasn't quite a cry, and then went quiet again in the way that hungry babies go quiet when they've run out of energy to protest. It was the most heartbreaking sound Solomon had ever heard. "Wait right here," he said. He left the door open and went to the kitchen. He was already pulling the whole milk from the refrigerator when he heard footsteps on the stairs and knew, without looking, that Renee had come down. "Solomon." Her voice was careful. "Who's at the door?" "A girl," he said. "And a baby. The baby needs milk." There was a pause. He heard her cross the living room. He heard the small sound she made when she saw them. Not surprise exactly, but something softer, something that caught her throat. He came back to the door with a glass, and then stopped himself. A glass wasn't right. He went back, found a clean bottle they kept in the cabinet from when Renee's sister visited with her infant nephew, filled it, tested the temperature on his wrist the way he had once seen someone do on television, and returned to the door. The girl watched him do all of this without saying a word. When he handed her the bottle, she shifted Tobias carefully in her arms, positioned it, and the baby latched on with a desperation that made Solomon look away for a moment. "Thank you," she whispered. Renee appeared at Solomon's shoulder. "Come inside," she said. It wasn't a question. The girl hesitated. Her eyes moved to the large brass sign mounted beside the gate at the edge of their property, the one the homeowners association had insisted on 3 years ago. Private community. No soliciting. No loitering. No trespassing. She had clearly read it on the way in. "I don't want to get you in any trouble," she said. "You won't," Renee said. "Come inside. It's cold." The girl came inside. Her name, she told them, was Imani. She sat on the very edge of the sofa, not leaning back, not settling in, just perched there like she might need to stand up and leave at any moment, and held Tobias while he drank, and she answered their questions in short, careful sentences. She lived with her grandmother. Her parents were not in the picture. She said this the way people say things they have long since made peace with, flatly, without drama. Her grandmother's name was Pearl. Pearl Osei. And tonight, about 3 hours ago, Pearl had collapsed in the kitchen while making dinner. A neighbor, Mrs. Aginola, had called the ambulance and gone with her to Riverside Memorial Hospital, and she had left a note. Imani produced it now from the front pocket of her hoodie, folded into a small, tight square, telling Imani not to walk anywhere alone and that a driver named Mr. Kofi would come and take them to the hospital. Mr. Kofi had not come. Imani had waited 2 hours. She had called the number Mrs. Aginola had left and gotten no answer. She had tried 3 other neighbors. 2 didn't open the door. 1 opened it, looked at her, and said they couldn't get involved. She had started walking, not entirely sure where she was going, only knowing that Tobias needed milk and that she needed to find her grandmother. Solomon took the note from her. He read it slowly. The handwriting was urgent but legible, a woman who had written quickly but was trying to be clear. Riverside Memorial. Cardiac emergency. Perlose. Please do not let the children walk alone. Below it, a phone number and a name, Josephine Aginola. He handed it to Renee. How far did you walk? He asked Imani. She thought about it. Maybe 40 minutes? I'm not sure. I was counting streets for a while, and then I stopped. Solomon sat down in the armchair across from her. He looked at this child, this composed, frightened, exhausted child, and he felt something move in his chest that the scotch and the board meeting and the CFO's tears had completely failed to move. Something old. Something that knew what it was looking at. Imani, he said, I'm going to call the hospital. Okay, she said, and then we're going to take you there. She looked at him carefully. Not with hope. Hope was too dangerous. He could see that in her face, but with something measuring, assessing, deciding whether to believe him. You don't have to do that, she said. I know, he said. I want to. Renee was already at the kitchen counter with her phone, dialing. Solomon watched Imani watch his wife, and he saw the exact moment the girl decided, quietly, to let herself breathe. Renee spoke to 3 different people at Riverside Memorial before she reached the cardiac unit. Solomon could hear fragments from across the room. Yes, Perlose admitted this evening. Yes, we've been wondering about the children. Yes, please bring them in. When Renee hung up, her face was composed, but her eyes were bright. She's alive, Renee said. She's in evaluation. They're waiting for Imani. Imani made no sound. She just closed her eyes for 3 seconds, and when she opened them, she said, Can we go now? They went. Solomon drove. Renee sat in the back with Imani and Tobias, and somewhere on the highway, she produced a small folded blanket from her bag. She always kept one. He had teased her about it for years, and tucked it around Tobias without ceremony, without making a production of it. Just did it the way people do things when they're trying not to make someone feel like a charity case. Imani noticed. She didn't say anything, but she noticed. The drive was mostly quiet. The city moved past the windows, amber-lit and indifferent. Imani held Tobias and looked out at the streets, and Solomon drove, and Renee sat beside them, and nobody forced conversation. It was the particular silence of people who are all, in their separate ways, holding their breath. Does she know you're coming? Imani asked at one point. The nurses know, Solomon said. They'll tell her. Imani nodded. Then, she's going to be upset that I walked. You did what you had to do, Renee said. She worries, Imani said, and her voice, for the first time, cracked slightly at the edges. Just slightly. Just enough to show the seam. She's always telling me not to go anywhere at night. She's going to say I should have stayed in the apartment and waited. She paused. But I couldn't just wait. Tobias was so hungry. I couldn't just sit there and listen to him cry and not do anything. I couldn't. Of course you couldn't, Renee said softly. I know it was against the rules, Imani said, and now she was talking to herself as much as to them, working something out. But sometimes the rules don't make sense for the situation you're actually in. Do you know what I mean? Solomon glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Yeah, he said. I know exactly what you mean. Riverside Memorial was a pale, wide building on the edge of the medical district, lit up white against the dark sky. Solomon pulled into the visitors' lot, and they walked in through the main entrance. Imani carrying Tobias with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing it since he was born, Solomon and Renee flanking her without discussion, as if they had simply decided without words that she should not walk into this place alone. The woman at the front desk recognized the situation before Imani had finished saying her grandmother's name. She picked up the phone, spoke quickly, and within 2 minutes a nurse appeared. A broad-shouldered woman named Claudette, who had the kind of face that has seen everything and has not been hardened by it, and she crouched down to Imani's level and said, Your grandmother has been asking about you. She's going to be so relieved. Imani's jaw tightened, holding it together. Can I see her? In just a few minutes, Claudette said. We're going to take you to a waiting area right outside her wing, and Dr. Fall is going to come talk to you first, and then you can go in. Is that okay? Imani nodded. And who are these folks? Claudette asked, glancing up at Solomon and Renee. They helped me, Imani said simply. Claudette looked at Solomon with an expression he couldn't quite read. Something between gratitude and relief and a thin layer of professional composure holding it all together. Thank you, she said to him, and meant it in a way that was more than polite. They were shown to a waiting area off the main corridor. A small room with blue chairs and a water dispenser and a framed print of a lighthouse on the wall that nobody had ever asked for. Renee took Tobias so Imani could rest her arms. Solomon sat down and stared at the lighthouse painting and thought about nothing in particular, which was unusual for him, but the night had taken on a quality that made thinking feel unnecessary. Dr. Fall came in 15 minutes later. She was a compact, precise woman in her 40s with reading glasses pushed up on her head and the quiet authority of someone who delivers difficult news for a living and has learned to do it without making it worse. She shook Solomon's hand, nodded at Renee, and then turned to Imani and spoke directly to her, which Solomon appreciated. Your grandmother had a cardiac event this evening, she said. Her heart went into an abnormal rhythm. We call it atrial fibrillation, and it caused her to lose consciousness. She's stable now. We've gotten her rhythm back under control with medication, and she's resting comfortably. But I want to be honest with you, Imani, because you seem like someone who can handle honesty. Imani straightened slightly. Yes, ma'am. Her heart has been under strain for a while. This wasn't the first warning sign. Her records show 2 prior visits in the last 18 months. What happened tonight was serious, and we're going to need to do more tests tomorrow morning to understand what's going on structurally. There may be a procedure required. We don't know yet, but I want you to understand that she is stable, she is awake, and she wants to see you. Imani breathed out slowly. Okay, she said. Thank you for telling me like that. Dr. Fall smiled. A real one, brief, but genuine. Of course. She turned to Solomon. Are you family? Solomon opened his mouth. They're with us, Imani said, before he could answer. Just that. Not explanatory, not elaborate. Just a clear, simple declaration. Dr. Fall nodded, as if this made complete sense. Visiting is restricted, but given the circumstances, I'll let you go in with her. She looked at Solomon. If you'd like to help facilitate her care going forward, there'll be some paperwork to discuss with our patient advocate. We can do that tonight or tomorrow, whatever works. Tonight, Solomon said. The nurse led them down a corridor that smelled of antiseptic and recycled air, past closed doors and the soft beeping of monitors, and stopped outside a room at the end of the hall. She pushed the door open gently and stood back. Imani walked in first. Solomon followed, 2 steps behind. He had no intention of intruding on what was clearly a private moment, and he hung back near the doorway, while Imani crossed the room to the bed where her grandmother lay, propped up on pillows, connected to a monitor whose green line traced its steady, reassuring peaks and valleys across the screen. Perlose was a small woman, 70, maybe 72. Her hair was gray and close-cropped, and her hands, resting on the blanket, were the hands of a woman who had worked hard and long. Her face, when she saw Imani, broke open completely. Relief, love, guilt, all of it at once. And she held out those hands, and Imani took them, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all. I told you not to walk at night, Pearl said finally, her voice thin but warm. I know, Grandma. You scare me to death. I've been lying here worried sick. You're the one in the hospital, Imani said, and there was a ghost of something wry in her voice, something that was almost a smile. I think you're the one who scared me. Pearl made a sound that was half laugh, half something else. She looked past Imani then, at Solomon and Renee standing near the door, and her expression shifted, cautious, grateful, trying to read them. These are the people who helped me, Imani said. Mr. Solomon and Mrs. Renee. They brought me here. Pearl looked at Solomon, and Solomon looked at Pearl, and the world seemed to tilt slightly on its axis. He knew that face. He knew those eyes, deep set, steady, the kind of eyes that see past what you're presenting to what's actually going on. He knew the particular quality of stillness she had, the way she held herself even now, even weakened and hooked to monitors, with a composed dignity that was not pride, but something quieter, something that had been earned rather than assumed. He had seen her once before. Once, and only once, but in a moment so pivotal, so defining, that he had carried the impression of her for 10 years without ever finding a name to attach to it. It had been a Tuesday in November, a decade ago. He had been 31 years old, recently bankrupt after his first company collapsed, 3 months behind on rent, his marriage at the time already failing, sitting on a bench outside the Eastside Community Center in a neighborhood he had gone to specifically because no one he knew would see him there. He had been sitting very still in the way people sit when they have made a decision they can't take back or just waiting for the moment to feel right. A woman had sat down next to him. She hadn't asked if he was okay. She hadn't offered him a pamphlet or a hotline number or any of the machinery of official concern. She had just sat down and said, "You look like a man who could use someone to talk to. I'm not going anywhere for a while. I'm a good listener." And he had talked. For nearly 2 hours, he had talked, and she had listened, and she had asked the right questions, not therapeutic questions, not probing questions, just human ones. And by the time he stood up to leave, something had shifted, not fixed, not solved, but shifted. He had gone home instead of not going home. And that had been the beginning of everything that came after. The rebuilding, the second company, the marriage to Renee. All of it had a hinge, and the hinge was that Tuesday and the woman on the bench. He had never learned her name. "I know you," Solomon said. His voice came out strange, low, roughened by something he wasn't expecting. Pearl looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes moved across his face slowly, carefully, the way people look when they are searching through years for a file they're not sure they kept. And then something happened in her expression. Something recognized. "The bench," she said quietly. "The bench," he said. Renee looked at him. Imani looked between them. Nobody spoke. "You were wearing a gray jacket," Pearl said. "You had a coffee cup you'd been holding so long it must have gone cold. You didn't want to be talked to, but you needed to be. You sat down anyway," Solomon said. "I almost didn't," Pearl admitted. "I was tired that day. I'd had a long shift. I told myself to mind my business and walk past." She paused. "But I sat down." "You sat down," he said. The room was very quiet except for the monitor and the distant sounds of the hospital corridor. Tobias had fallen asleep in Renee's arms. Imani was watching her grandmother with an expression that was trying to understand something larger than it currently had the context for. "I never knew your name," Solomon said. "I never knew yours," Pearl said. "Solomon Adebayo. Pearl Osei." She looked at him steadily. "You did well for yourself. Because of that Tuesday," he said. "In every way that matters, because of that Tuesday." Pearl shook her head slightly. "You did that. I just sat down." "You sat down when you didn't have to," he said. "That's not a small thing." Renee made a quiet sound and pressed her fingers briefly to her mouth. She was not a woman who cried easily or publicly, but her eyes were bright, and she turned slightly away to compose herself, and Solomon loved her for that, for feeling it fully and managing it gracefully. Imani said, very quietly, "Grandma, what is happening?" Pearl reached out and took her granddaughter's hand again. "A long time ago," she said, "I did something small, and it turns out it mattered more than I knew." She looked at Solomon. "Life is strange." "It is," he agreed. He pulled a chair to the bedside and sat down, not to take over the room or insert himself, but simply because it felt wrong to stand at a distance from this woman who had, without knowing it, saved his life. Renee settled into the chair by the window with Tobias, and Imani perched beside her grandmother, and for a while they all just existed in the same space, and the night outside pressed against the window, and inside the room there was warmth and the soft beeping of a heart that was, thank God, still beating. Dr. Fall returned 20 minutes later with a patient advocate named Mr. Darko, a soft-spoken man with a clipboard and the careful manner of someone who regularly navigates the gap between what medicine can do and what people can afford. He looked at Solomon with the polite, professional neutrality of someone who was about to have a conversation about money and did not want to presume. Solomon did not make him work for it. Whatever she needs, he said, tonight and going forward. Whatever the procedure costs, whatever the follow-up care looks like, whatever she needs to not have to worry about the bill while she's trying to get well. Handle it and send it to me. Mr. Darko blinked. He had clearly prepared for a negotiation. Mr. Adebayo, we do have financial assistance programs if... I'm not applying for assistance, Solomon said, not unkindly. I'm offering to cover it. Directly. Whatever is needed. Pearl started to say something. He could see it in her face, the beginning of the refusal that proud people offer when they do not want to be indebted. And he leaned forward. Pearl, he said, please, let me. She closed her mouth. Open it again. I don't take charity, she said quietly. This isn't charity, he said. This is a debt. You sat down on a bench 10 years ago, and you gave me 2 hours you didn't have, and you didn't ask for anything in return. I've been carrying that unpaid for a decade. Let me pay it. Pearl looked at him for a long time. The monitor beeped its steady rhythm. Tobias sighed in his sleep. All right, Pearl said at last. All right. The relief that moved through Solomon's chest was enormous and surprised him with its size. Mr. Darko left with what he needed. Dr. Fall outlined the next morning's tests, an echocardiogram, a stress test conducted carefully given Pearl's current state, and a consultation with a cardiologist who would determine whether the blockage they suspected required intervention. Solomon listened to all of it, asked 3 specific questions, and wrote down the answers. Imani listened too, her brow slightly furrowed, absorbing every word with the focused attention of someone who knows she will need to remember this later. At one point, Dr. Fall turned to Imani and said, You're her primary caregiver at home, is that right? Yes, ma'am, Imani said. Dr. Fall looked at her carefully, this 12-year-old girl who had walked 40 minutes in the cold with a baby to find her grandmother, and something moved briefly across the doctor's face. Not pity, something more like recognition and respect. You're doing a remarkable job, she said quietly. She's lucky to have you. Imani didn't say anything. She just nodded once and looked at her hands. Visiting hours ended at 11. Claudette reappeared to let them know, apologetically but firmly, and Pearl made Imani promise, twice, to go home and sleep, and Imani made Pearl promise, twice, to do the same, and this negotiation between them had the easy rhythm of something that had happened many times before, 2 people who knew each other's patterns and had worked out the terms of their love over years of proximity and need. In the corridor, Solomon spoke to the charge nurse and ensured that Pearl had a private room arranged for the night, that the staff had his personal number, and that someone would call him the moment there was any development, any at all, regardless of the hour. The nurse looked at him with a mildly startled expression of someone who had expected to have to argue and was finding they didn't need to. He found Imani waiting by the elevator with Tobias awake again now, blinking sleepily at the fluorescent lights. She's going to be okay, Solomon said. Imani considered this. She's going to need a lot of help, she said. It wasn't a complaint. It was just an assessment. An honest accounting of the situation from a girl who had clearly been doing honest accountings of situations for a long time. I know, he said. I can manage, Imani said, and her chin came up slightly. I've been managing. I know you have, Solomon said. You've been doing an incredible job, but you shouldn't have to do it alone. He paused. And starting now, you won't. She looked at him. I mean that, he said. Not just the hospital. All of it. Your grandmother's recovery. Your school, stable housing, whatever it takes to make sure you can just be a 12-year-old girl for a while instead of running a household. Imani was quiet for a moment. Then why? It was such a direct question, delivered without accusation, just genuine and clear, that it stopped him. Why? Not in the suspicious sense. Not in the way people sometimes ask why, when they mean, what do you want in return? Just honestly, simply wanting to understand the reason. Because your grandmother sat down on a bench, he said, when she didn't have to, when she was tired and she could have walked past. She sat down and it changed my life. And now I get to be the person who sits down when I could walk past. And I'm not walking past. Imani studied him with those quiet, measuring eyes. Then she nodded once, the same nod she had given Dr. Fall, the gesture of someone who has processed something and filed it as real. The elevator came. They wrote it down. In the car on the way to Imani's apartment, the address extracted gently from Imani by Renee, who had also, somewhere in the hospital, produced a granola bar and pressed it into the girl's hand without ceremony. Solomon drove, and Renee sat with Tobias again, and Imani gave directions from the front seat with the familiarity of someone who has navigated this city on foot and knows every turn. The apartment building, when they arrived, was not what Solomon had hoped for and exactly what he had feared. A four-story walk-up with a broken outer light, a buzzer panel with half the names missing, a lobby that smelled of old cooking and mildew. Livable. Many people lived here. But not, he thought, the right place for a recovering 70-year-old woman with a cardiac condition to be climbing stairs. He said nothing about this tonight. Imani led them up to the second floor. She had a key on a string around her neck. He had noticed it earlier without registering what it meant, and now it landed with its full weight. She unlocked the door and reached in to turn on the light, and the apartment was small, but tidy in the way that people keep things tidy when they have very little and take care of what they have. A child's drawing was taped to the refrigerator. A row of shoes by the door, lined up precisely. A stack of library books on the table. "You'll be okay here tonight?" Renee asked. "Yes, ma'am," Imani said. "Mrs. Aginola is in 2C. I can knock if I need anything." "I want you to have my number," Solomon said. He found a card in his wallet. A personal card, not a business one, with his direct cell, and held it out to her. "Anything at all. Call me." She took the card and looked at it. "Mr. Adebayo," she said. "Thank you. For all of this. I don't know how to say it properly." "You don't need to," he said. "But I want to." She looked up at him. "I knocked on a lot of doors tonight. Most of them didn't open. And the ones that did," she paused. "People can be really unkind when they're scared. I understand it, I think. But it's still." She stopped again, searching for the word. "It still hurts," Renee said gently. "Yes," Imani said. "It still hurts." She looked between them. "You didn't have to open your door. And then you kept being kind after that. You kept choosing it. I want you to know that I noticed." Solomon was quiet for a moment. "You're an extraordinary young woman," he said. "Your grandmother raised something remarkable." Imani almost smiled. Almost. The exhaustion was winning now, pulling at the edges of her composure. "Get some sleep," Solomon said. "We'll be at the hospital in the morning. First thing." "Okay," she said. "Lock the door behind you." "I always do." They left her there, the door clicking shut behind them, the lock turning, and walked back down the dark stairwell to the street. In the car, Renee said nothing for 3 minutes. Then, "We have to do more than the hospital bills." "I know," Solomon said. "The apartment. The stairs. She can't bring Pearl home to those stairs." "I know. And Imani needs," Renee stopped. Started again. "She needs to be able to be a child, Solomon. She's 12 years old, and she's running a family." "I know," he said again. "We'll figure it out. All of it." Renee looked out the window. "She took the card," she said, and her voice was soft now. And what she meant was, she trusted us enough to take the card. And they both knew what that cost a child who had knocked on doors that didn't open, who had been turned away by people who were scared, who had learned in one night how many ways people find to say no to a girl who is only asking for a glass of milk. The procedure happened the next morning at 9:15. Solomon was there. Renee was there. Imani was there, with Tobias in a soft carrier across her chest, and she stood very straight in the waiting room and spoke to no one and looked at the double doors that led to the surgical wing with an expression of pure, concentrated will, as if she could keep her grandmother safe by sheer force of attention. Dr. Fall came out at 10:40. "It went well," she said. "The blockage has been cleared. She came through cleanly. She's going to need 8 to 12 weeks of careful recovery, with cardiac rehabilitation, medication, and monitoring, but the prognosis is genuinely good. She has a strong heart. Stubborn, almost. A small smile. I suspect that runs in the family." Imani let out a breath that had been locked inside her since 9:15. It came out slow and long and shaking slightly at the end, and then she composed herself, and then she looked at Solomon and said, "Can I see her?" "Soon," Dr. Fall said. "Give her an hour." Solomon nodded. He took out his phone and made 2 calls. One to his assistant to clear his entire day, One to a property manager he trusted with an instruction to find a ground floor apartment in a safe building within the next 2 weeks, accessible, close to Riverside Memorial, good school district, non-negotiable. The property manager started to ask questions about budget. Solomon told him the budget was not a constraint. The manager went quiet and then said he'd call back in 3 hours. He put the phone away and sat down in the blue chair next to Imani. She was looking at the lighthouse painting again, the same one from last night. He wondered how many people had sat in this room and looked at that painting without seeing anything. Mr. Adebayo, Imani said. Solomon, he said. She tried it out. Solomon. A pause. What happens now? After she comes home? After the recovery? What happens to all of this? You and us. He thought about how to answer. He didn't want to make promises that sounded like speeches. He didn't want to perform largesse. He wanted to be accurate. What happens, he said, is that you and your grandmother and Tobias don't navigate this alone anymore. I'm not going to disappear after the exciting part is over. That's not what this is. I don't know exactly what the shape of it looks like yet. We'll figure that out together, the four of us, maybe with your grandmother's input when she's well enough. But the basics are stable housing, her care costs covered, your school secured, and someone you can actually call when something goes wrong. He paused. Beyond that, we take it 1 week at a time. Imani considered this carefully. That's a lot, she said. It is, he agreed. Why does it feel like you mean it? Because I do. She looked at him. That measuring look, that assessment. People say things, she said quietly, especially in hospitals. They say things when it's emotional, and then life goes back to normal, and the things they said don't follow them home. I know, he said. Watch me. Another pause. Then, okay, she said. Okay. The hour passed. Claudette came and led them back. Pearl was awake, pale, tired, hooked to a different configuration of tubes and monitors now. But awake, and her eyes when they found Imani were bright and full and completely present. Imani walked to the bed and took her grandmother's hand and stood there, and Solomon stayed by the door again, because some moments are not for witnesses. But Pearl looked past Imani and found his eyes across the room. Still here, she said, not surprised, just noting it, like she was confirming something she had suspected. Still here, he said. She nodded slowly. Then I suppose, she said, we have some catching up to do. He smiled. 10 years worth. Sit down, then Pearl said. And somebody better have brought coffee because I have been in this bed since last night, and I'm tired of bad news, and I could use something that's just normal. Just a normal conversation. Renee laughed. Actually laughed. Free and sudden and real. She reached into her bag and produced, from some impossible interior pocket, a thermos. Pearl looked at it. Then at Renee. I like her, she said to Solomon. So do I, he said. Every day more. They sat. They talked. The monitors beeped their steady rhythm. Tobias slept. Outside the window, the morning had gone bright and ordinary. The city moving through its regular business, unaware of what had happened here in this room, in this hospital, in this strange and circular night that had begun with a knock at a door and a girl asking for the smallest possible thing. Just a glass of milk. Just one glass. For her brother. And from that smallest possible ask, from that brave and careful knock on a door that could have stayed closed, everything. A debt repaid. A family held. A porch light left on. 3 weeks later, Pearl and Imani and Tobias moved into a new apartment. Ground floor. Good light. A school 2 blocks away, where Imani was enrolled the following Monday. A cardiac rehabilitation program 3 bus stops from the front door. Though Solomon had arranged a car for those days, and Pearl had accepted this after arguing about it for 2 days and then deciding she had more important battles to fight. On the last night in the old apartment, Imani walked through each room slowly, the way you do when you're saying goodbye to a place that was hard but was also home. She stood in the kitchen where Pearl had fallen and looked at the floor for a moment. And then she went to the window and looked out at the street below, the street light and the dark and the ordinary world that had asked so much of her for so long. She thought about the doors that hadn't opened. She thought about the one that had. She thought about how she had stood on a porch in the cold, holding her brother, trying to be brave enough to ask for the smallest thing she could ask for, hoping someone would say yes. How she had tried to make herself as unthreatening as possible, as minimal as possible, had chosen the words carefully. I'm not trying to cause any trouble. I'm only asking for a glass of milk, because she had learned young that people find reasons not to help, and she wanted to give them as few reasons as possible. And still most of them had said no. And then one hadn't. And that one no that became a yes had opened into something she didn't have words for yet. Something that wasn't charity and wasn't rescue and wasn't a story with a neat bow on it, but was real and ongoing and asked things of her too. Asked her to trust, which was hard. Asked her to accept help, which was harder. Asked her to believe that the porch light being on was not a mistake or a coincidence, but a choice made deliberately on her behalf. She was learning to believe it. Slowly, one day at a time, but learning. She turned off the light in the old kitchen for the last time and went to help Pearl with the last of the boxes. And somewhere across the city, in a house with a well-lit porch, Solomon Adebayo locked up for the night and did not turn the outside light off. He never did anymore. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the doors you have the power to open, please like this video, leave a comment below telling us what moment hit you hardest, and subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that one choice, one door, one glass of milk can change everything. We'll see you in the next one.